Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Paul D'Ambrosio, and I teach Chinese philosophy at East China Normal University, where the 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Project is based. Today, we are very happy to host our third book discussion on Professor Sungmoon Kim's Confucian Constitutionalism, Dignity, Rights, and Democracy. Professor Winnie Song from the Nanyang Technical University will chair this discussion. And the invited discussants are Professor Liu Qing from East China Normal University, Loubna Alamani, did I say that right or close enough? From Northwestern University, and Nicholas Tampio from Fordham University. I want to thank these participants and everyone in the audience for making this event possible. Before handing things over to the chair, Professor Winnie Song, I want to briefly introduce the 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Project. The 四海为学 project hopes to distinguish itself from some of the more unhelpful conventional practices in contemporary academia. As posted on our website, we are not interested in male peacocks, in jerks, or in any form of egoism and self-promotion. We hope to curb these types of aggressive or look at me, I'm smarter than you, or don't I know so much, and similar types of attitudes in academic exchange. The 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Project hopes to accomplish this shift in orientation during academic exchange by encouraging productive communication, humble discussions, real questions, responses that are open, and cooperative learning together. This is in part, for example, why we call this a book discussion series and not an author meets critic series, right? So the idea is, of course, critical comments are welcome, but also just exploring ideas and not necessarily being critical is just as welcome. As many of us know all too well, miscommunication and missed communication can have disastrous results, from ordering the wrong food to starting wars. So let's not be jerks and try to learn together. And one more thing I want to mention before introducing Professor Winnie Song is I think many people will probably know Professor Sungmoon Kim because he writes a lot of books and they're very impressive. But Professor Sungmoon Kim is someone who really embodies in a lot of ways exactly what the 四海为学 project is after, because even though he's so knowledgeable and he is so prolific, he's also a very humble and really kind of like down-to-earth person. I think I've only met you a couple times in person, but yeah, you've always been really nice and a really great person to be around. So it's really great to have you here. So I now want to introduce Professor Winnie Song, who's going to be the chair of this session. She's an associate professor of philosophy at Nanyang Technical University in Singapore. Her current research covers three main areas. The first area is concerned with early Confucian thought, especially with the Preaching philosopher Xunzi. The second area is concerned with moral psychology, and she's worked on topics such as hypocrisy, trustworthiness, resentment, and sympathy. And the third area is concerned with issues that are at the intersection of epistemology and philosophy of mind, focusing especially on reasoning and self-knowledge. So thank you very much, Winnie, for chairing this session.
A pleasure, my honor. So can I start now? Okay. All right. So I'll start sharing. I'm following Paul's flow here, but there's not an introducing Prof Kim session, but I still prepare a short introduction of Professor Sungmoon Kim. Okay, so Professor Sungmoon Kim, I think I don't need to introduce too much. Those of you who are here probably are already familiar with his work, but it's still worth saying that Professor Kim is a professor of political theory and director of the Center for East Asian and Comparative Philosophy at City University of Hong Kong. He received a PhD in political science from the University of Maryland at College Park and taught previously at the University of Richmond and Yonsei University. His research interests include Confucian democratic and constitutional theory, East Asian political thought, and comparative political theory. He has published widely and prolifically. His articles have appeared in many top quality journals, which are too numerous to be listed here. Just to name a few, they include American Political Science Review, British Journal of Political Science, Contemporary Political Philosophy, I think my brain is wired. Contemporary Political Theory, European Journal of Political Theory, History of Political Thought, Journal of the History of Ideas, Philosophy East and West. Professor Kim is the author of 5 books. They are Confucian Democracy in East Asia Theory and Practice by Cambridge University Press, Public Reason, Confucianism, Democratic Professionalism, and Constitutionalism in East Asia by Cambridge University Press, Democracy After Virtue Toward Pragmatic Confucian Democracy by Oxford University Press, Theorizing Confucian Virtue Politics, The Political Philosophy of Mencius and Xunzi by Cambridge University Press, and Im Yunji Dang by Cambridge University Press. And his new book, Confucian Constitutionalism, Dignity, Rights, and Democracy, which is what we are here for today, was just published by Oxford University Press this year in June, maybe in 2023. So, okay, so without further ado, I'll pass the time to Professor Kim. So Professor Kim, you will have about 20 minutes in total. So yeah, so I'll pass it.
Okay, thank you, Winnie, for very nice, generous introduction of me. And I'm very grateful to Paul for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to present my work to a larger audience. Thank you so much. I'm also very grateful to all those participants here discussing my book. So I guess most of you have not read at least part of my book. So I briefly introduce to you the motive of writing this book and what I intend to discuss in the book by reading part of my introduction. So I published several books on Confucian democracy. And as a South Korean, I was always troubled or puzzled over the fact that South Koreans were neither wholesale Western liberals, nor traditionalist Confucians. Somehow we are in between, conducting ourselves as just like American liberals or Western liberals on the one hand, but the way we teach our children, the way we relate ourselves with our parents and elders and neighbors and teachers and students, I thought was quite different from the way many so-called Western citizens relate themselves amongst themselves. So one of my major research question as a young man was how to make sense of the existence of this hybrid identity that we South Koreans have as uniquely, distinctly modern people, and what kind of political philosophy theory we can generate that can help us make better sense of our social and cultural existence as Koreans and Chinese and Japanese and Vietnamese. But the problem, of course, is that we don't have this language, because if you go to college, many of you at the college level education, what we're learning is mainly about Western political theory, educational theory, legal philosophy. Almost everything has been introduced from the West, so that there is a great cacophony, disharmony between the way we tend to think about ourselves, morally, politically, on the one hand, and the way and the kind of institutions and theories and concepts with which we have to navigate ourselves in our public and social and even individual lives. So my self-imposed task was to develop a language, theoretical language that can, again, help us make sense of our existence, something that can be meaningful to us, rather than something that has been imposed on us to which we have to adapt ourselves. So that has led me to produce series of books and articles. Sometimes through normative engagement, sometimes through historical investigation, sometimes through critical reflections. So all of my research, sometimes it's about historical thought in the context of ancient China, sometimes medieval China, sometimes pre-modern Korean context, or my more explicit normative investigation of Confucian democracy and constitutionalism all revolve around what kind of public identity East Asians of Confucian heritage could develop. That's where I am as a political theorist. So this book in particular aims to present a democratic theory of Confucian constitutionalism. More specifically, it explores a mode of constitutional democracy that is normatively appealing and politically practicable in the East Asian societies of Confucian heritage that are increasingly pluralist, multicultural, and rights sensitive. By being normatively appealing, I mean the Confucian constitutionalism must offer an overarching and coherent normative perspective on the foundation of moral worth or dignity of a human being as conceived by Confucianism. The rights it generates as a legally entrenched moral entitlement by which people can protect their basic interest against unjustified intrusion of the state, and the legal and political institutions that safeguard such rights in a way that is consistent with the Confucian values and moral reasoning. By being politically practicable, I mean the Confucian constitutionalism must take seriously societal pluralism as unfolding in East Asia, which is markedly different from the so-called factable pluralism that emerged in the West after the Reformation and the subsequent wars of religion, and which inspired many prominent contemporary liberal political philosophers, including most notably John Rawls. Taking pluralism seriously also means that Confucian constitutionalism must strike a good balance between its respect for the plurality of values and what I call Confucian public reason and Confucian democratic rights, the shared reason by Confucian democratic citizens and the rights they enjoy as a self-governing people in a Confucian democratic society, respectively. The first goal, my normative goal, rendered this book primarily a philosophical study of constitutionalism. To fulfill this goal, this book examines and reconstructs the Confucian idea of human dignity, justifies the foundational rights that the people possess as both ruler and ruled in East Asia as a post-monarchical and republican political context, and articulates the authority of and relationships between constitutional institutions such as executive, legislature, and the judiciary, whose shared responsibility consists in protecting the people's constitutional rights. The book's second goal, which is a practical goal, makes my theory of Confucian constitutionalism socially grounded, paying close attention to the specific mode of pluralism that Confucian civic culture has given rise to through its horizontal communication with non-Confucian values, philosophical doctrines, and religious faith in civil society on the one hand, as well as its vertical interaction with the democratic principles, institutions, and rights on the other. These two goals are not necessarily congruent with each other, and in contemporary Confucian political theory, they tend to be treated as separate questions. In fact, most Confucian political theorists, you can name them, Bai Tongdong, Joseph Chan, Steve Engel, and many others, Sung Tan, are immersed in philosophical reconstruction of Confucianism understood primarily as a philosophical tradition, and they pay little attention to the dimension of Confucianism as a societal culture, which admittedly renders it more intractable or difficult as an object of philosophical reconstruction than Confucian philosophy. It's easier to study Mencius, Sun Tzu, Wang Yangming, Juxi, and reconstruct Confucian idea of democracy, communitarianism out of those textual investigations rather than looking at what kind of societal culture in each ourselves we find ourselves, because the way we interpret our societal existence is quite controversial, I guess, more controversial than textual interpretation, although textual interpretation are equally, I guess, subject to philosophical disagreement and contestation. One of the guiding ambitions of this book, therefore, is to construct a political theory of Confucian Constitutionalism in which these two goals, normative and practical goals, are connected in a systematic and coherent fashion. I call the new normative theory result from this endeavor Confucian democratic constitutionalism. That being said, this book also has a secondary aim, which is to offer a formidable philosophical rejoinder to the Confucian meritocratic and liberal critics of Confucian democracy from a constitutional standpoint. First, this book attempts to meet the challenge by scholars identified by Steve Engel, professor of philosophy at Wesleyan University, as institutional Confucians who assert, quote, rather than its metaphysics and ethics, like Mo Zhongshan, Dang Jun, you can name them, Confucianism's political and other institutions are what Confucians today need to rediscover, reinvent, and advocate if Confucianism is to play a constructive role in Chinese society, end of quote. Steve Engel presents several Chinese scholars, including Zhang Qing, Gang Xiaoguang, Fan Weiping, as representative figures of institutional Confucianism. But I believe, as I just mentioned, that virtually all advocates of a Confucian political meritocracy who propose a meritocratic upper house in the like Shenxiwan, in the legislature can be added to this group, including Daniel Bai, Dong Dongbai, and arguably Joseph Chen, among others. In proposing an alternative political theory to both liberal and Confucian democracy, Confucian meritocrats are eager to articulate the constitutional structure of a modern Confucian political theory that can make it meritorious in generating good public decisions and thus, in their judgment, superior to liberal representative and constitutional democracy. Confucian meritocrats believe that the meritocratic upper house can realize so-called rule by the best and the brightest by constraining the dangerous force of the will of the people who are mainly, according to them, uneducated and myopic, expressed through the democratic lower house comprised of or composed of elected representatives. However, in their endeavor to justify the meritocratic upper house as the institutional pivot of Confucian political meritocracy, Confucian meritocrats hardly present a coherent normative theory of Confucian constitutionalism. What is critically missing in their political proposals is, among other things, a discussion on the overarching constitutional principle or value that undergirds their institutional suggestions. The social conditions that generate a specific mode of constitutional politics, the constitutional standing of civil and political rights, and the relationship among the constitutional institutions, especially between the legislature and the judiciary with regard to rights protection. Many Confucian meritocrats argue that rule of law, at the core of which lies protection of basic rights, is consistent with Confucian political meritocracy, but they do not illuminate how this congruence can actually be obtained. Their most common strategy is to defend the Confucian political meritocracy in terms of non-democratic liberalism. Liberalism is okay, rule of rights, rule of law, freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom of religion, freedom of thought. These are okay, but not democracy. Democracy is problematic because people are stupid or narrow and self-centered interested. So in other words, while Confucian political meritocracy is against democracy or embraces only minimal form of democracy, such as election, it nonetheless respects rule of law and basic rights. So we can think of Hong Kong, previous Hong Kong, or Singapore as well. Arguably, of course, Singapore has changed dramatically in recent years. This is an ad hoc juxtaposition, in my view, not an argument for an integrated theory. In my book, I argue that the congruence between rule of law and rights protection and Confucian meritocracy is difficult to obtain under the circumstances of a modern politics marked by value pluralism and moral disagreement, and that Confucian democratic constitution, my theory, offers a compelling normative theory that integrates rule of law, rights protection, democracy, and Confucian perfectionism into a coherent philosophical system. I'm not saying that the argument for Confucian meritocracy is totally misguided or wrong. I think they have a very important point to make. What I'm trying to say is that in making their argument philosophically, they reveal lots of inconsistencies that invite people like me to help them see the problems. And in the course of revamping their problems, I think we are naturally, in my view, led to acknowledgement of the value of Confucian democracy. So I'm not advocating wholesale embracement of Western-style democracy. I don't think that's feasible in East Asian context, especially in mainland Chinese context. What I'm arguing is that if we have a problem with Western-style liberal democracy or representative democracy, why not turning to Confucian style of democracy rather than wholesale dismissing the value of democracy in total? The second group of scholars that this book aims to engage consists of political liberals and moderate liberal perfectionists, or together I would just call them liberals. The liberal critics argue that by giving a moral and political privilege to Confucianism, any argument for Confucian democracy is doomed to fail as a normative claim under the condition of pluralism. In chapter 2 of my book, I call this problem the pluralism dilemma. At first glance, the pluralism dilemma seems to pose an insurmountable, formidable philosophical challenge for Confucian democracy or Confucian political theory in general. Because, as I have argued elsewhere in my previous books, Confucian political theory is ineluctably perfectionist. If the term Confucian has to possess any intelligibility as a philosophy, culture, or political tradition, although the nature of perfectionism, whether it's strong or moderate, for instance, remains an important practical concern. Analytically savvy, most of these philosophers are analytic trained political philosophers. The liberal critics appeal to the logical incompatibility of the two horns of the horn of the pluralism dilemma, comprehensive Confucian perfectionism on the one hand, and respect for plurality on the other. They argue, they believe that if someone supports for Confucianism as a kind of comprehensive philosophical doctrine, that person is naturally prevented from endorsing the plurality of values, because these two horns are inconsistent. And they argue that Confucian democracy, once enacted, would inevitably, ineluctably oppress, offend non-Confucians, thus making it morally illegitimate. The problem, in my view, is that this analytic framework is critically limited in capturing and morally evaluating the important differences between Confucian meritocracy and Confucian democracy, and between strong Confucian perfectionism and moderate Confucian perfectionism, because they just reject wholesale whatever argument that tries to take Confucianism seriously. If anything, to liberal critics, these differences between meritocracy, Confucian meritocracy, and democracy, strong perfectionism, moderate perfectionism, these differences are viewed merely in terms of degrees, making existing Confucian political theories more or less illegitimate, when in fact, they have generated serious moral and political disagreement among Confucian political theories. If you look at the current field of Confucian, at least normative Confucian political theory, the major debate that drives the field is the debate between Confucian meritocrats and Confucian democrats. But liberal critics' framework doesn't help us clearly understand what's at stake between these groups of theorists, because they tend to dismiss wholesale any political theory, Confucian political theory, simply because of its presumable incompatibility with value pluralism. An analogy might be useful here. So let me give you some analogy, okay? It is scientifically true that density of iron is greater than the density of water, and this fact logically entails that the weight of an iron nail, or pencil, iron pencil, is greater than the buoyancy of water experienced by it. Since this is true scientifically, a good scientist may logically conclude that a ship made of iron would sink in the water because it is heavier than an iron nail. But we all know that this is an incorrect conclusion. A larger iron ship can float because of its shape, which creates a vast internal space, allowing air to be filled within the hulk of the ship. The air within the ship then helps reduce its density, making it float on the water. In my view, the point that liberal-minded analytic critics try to make against Confucian democracy is not so different from reiterating the undeniable fact that iron always sinks in water due to its higher density, and therefore that any argument that claims that iron can float on the water is false. Put differently, according to liberal critics, Confucian perfectionism is logically incompatible with a pluralist democracy, and any attempt to connect these two would inevitably fail. However, liberal critics do not seem to realize that Confucian democracy can take different forms or shapes depending on what form or shape it takes. It may or may not be compatible with the pluralism. It may be more or less legitimate. Okay, so I'm trying to present more, if not perfectly legitimate form of a Confucian democracy in this book. From a political theory standpoint, constitutionalism provides both an overarching normative framework and an intricate institutional form that combine to render the polity that it portrays is legitimate in varying degrees. I think it's extremely important. Political theory, you cannot say one political theory is perfectly legitimate or perfectly good. Maybe an idea, but I don't believe in ideal theory. I think it's always a matter of degree, whether it's more legitimate than the existing alternatives that we have or we are experimenting with. So I'm not saying my theory would address all the problems, all the analytical or philosophical problems raised by my meritocratic or especially liberal critics, but all I'm trying to say is that in the world that we know, what I'm trying to propose in this book is better and more legitimate, if not perfectly legitimate. Okay. Rather than making a sweeping argument that all forms of non-liberal regimes are inherently illegitimate under the factor of pluralism, the constitutional approach to political theory allows us to come to grips with the important normative and political differences between various constitutional arrangements and helps us to evaluate their respective strengths and weaknesses by way of comparison. In fact, it is precisely in this spirit that I find the Confucian political meritocracy far less legitimate, if not completely illegitimate, in comparison to what I'm trying to propose in this book, Confucian democratic constitutionalism. It is not merely because of a strongly perfectionist Confucianism that underpins the Confucian political meritocracy, which only applies to a few Confucian meritocrats such as Jiang Qing and Fan Ruiping. I criticize the Confucian political meritocracy for an additional, but no less important reason, namely the specific constitutional structure on which it rests, but which makes my critique more broadly applicable to all Confucian meritocratic constitutionalists who propose a meritocratic upper house in the legislature. I discuss in chapter 2 of my book that by framing their critique of Confucian political theory in terms of a dilemma between Confucianism and pluralism, liberal critics fail to address a more complex and politically relevant question of whether the specific political institutional forms that Confucian political theory takes can help the Confucian polity afloat on the sea of plural values and moral disagreement. I hope the political theory of Confucian democratic constitutionalism can encourage the liberal critics to revisit their pessimism regarding the possibility of a viable Confucian democracy in a pluralist context with more attention to its institutional form. Again, I know I was given 20 minutes, but I guess this lays out my basic idea in writing and publishing this book quite, okay, if not well. So I'll stop here, and then I'd like to hear what my discussants have to say about my argument. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Kim. That's a very good time control. Okay, so we will start our discussion. Our first discussant is Professor Liu Qing from East China Normal University. So Professor Liu, you will have about 10 minutes to discuss, and then we will have 10 minutes for Professor Kim to respond to you. Okay, before you start, I'll just introduce you. Professor Liu Qing is Zhejiang Distinguished Professor at East China Normal University. He received PhD in Political Science from the University of Minnesota. His main research interests lie in intellectual history, political philosophy, and world politics. His publications include lectures on modern Western thought, Great Reversal, intellectual trends in the West since 2000, the myth of Chineseness, and the undetermined moment, modernity and Western thought. Professor Liu has received fellowship from the MacArthur Foundation, American Social Science Research Council, the Fulbright Scholar Program, the Program for New Century Excellent Talents of the Chinese Ministry of Education, and the Harvard Yenqing Visiting Scholars Program. So thank you, Professor Liu. Professor Liu, you are muted. Your mic. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Sun, for your introduction. It's my pleasure and honor to participate in this book discussion. My gratitude goes to 四海为学. It's a great project. It's called Collaborative Learning. We, through 四海为学, reach to 四海为家, hopefully, especially for Paul, for your invitation. And it's also a great pleasure to see Sungmoon again online after our meeting in the conference at the CTU of Hong Kong in June. That there are many things I like to say, but I have about 10 minutes, and so I try to be brief. First, really, I want to congratulate Professor Kim for complete such a truly outstanding work. I read this book with great interest and admiration. It's a very ambitious project, but it's achieved so well. Oh, that's this inspiring, provocative, and convincing. Well, mostly, I not only learned a great deal, but I was deeply moved. Feel moved about academic work is odd, it's strange, especially I'm a friend of Confucian, myself, hardly a Confucian. I am moved because I see a explanatory or embodiment of contemporary Jun's in this work. A real combination of Confucian moral ethos and the philosophical reasoning. That's I admire most. Professor Kim, I think, placed himself in a greater tradition, what we can call Confucian Constitutionalism, which can be traced back to Kongzi, Mengzi, and more recently in 20th centuries, Liang Qichao and Liang Suming. I would like to call this progressive Confucianism, although Confucianism is more often than not seen as a conservative. So I believe Professor Kim work represents not only a new chapter, but also a landmark in the evolution or development of this tradition of progressive Confucianism. I do not use these words lightly. This work directly confronts the most significant and challenging issues in both contemporary political theory and political Confucianism. He conducted a struggle on two fronts. One is his family internal struggle argue against the Confucian meritocracy politics, and the other is political liberalism, offering a critical and original response with exceptional philosophical sensitivity, sophisticated theoretical treatment, and a great sense of reality and a sense of practicality. Let me move quickly to two examples that particularly impressed me from my standpoint of view, that is egalitarian liberalism or rising liberal. Just to briefly mention Kim's two treatment without details about civic Confucianism and the public reason Confucianism. For political Confucianism, how to address the modern condition, especially the challenge from value probabilism, is an old question. Kim, in this sense, Kim and Rawls faced a similar dilemma, but took a quite different approach to address this challenge. Rawls tries to isolate comprehensive doctrine from political liberalism, from his theory of justice. In contrast, Professor Kim critically, that's very impressive, deeply, critically revisit Rawls' treatment, and they discovered that there's a diversity among the different kind of comprehensive doctrine, and that there are different consequences in terms of political normativity and political practice. He deals with the potential of Confucianism as a partially comprehensive doctrine and a moderate perfectionism, responding to the criticism from people like me, liberals, regarding Confucian Constitutionalism, especially the problem of coercion of the state or discrimination against the non-Confucian. It's very successful, I think. And the second, his construction of his usage of civic Confucianism. I believe civic Confucianism contains a two-side argument. One is a negative argument, the other is a positive. The negative argument suggests that Confucianism as a partially comprehensive doctrine, it can be transformed into a form of a civic Confucianism through a specific interpretations, which is not in conflict with democratic constitutionalism. At least it can compatible with constitutionalism. I think it's a negative argument. And there's also positive argument of civic Confucianism. Professor King did not adopt Rawls' widely accepted move of separating the good from the right and giving priority to the right in the public or political life. And the separation of the good and the right is an issue where I initially had a doubt when I read Rawls, because in contemporary society, the boundary between public and the personal or private life are become increasingly blurred. An individual life is simultaneously facing the question of the good and the right. And we are always pursue a good life through a common life, right? So the civic Confucianism argument provide a novel effort to combine the good with the right. And I believe a properly conceived conception of the good can promote and enrich civic virtues and hence contribute to citizens' political participation, democratic process, and the protection of individuals' constitutional rights. I think he did this very impressive. It's marvelously successful. And the second one is a public reason Confucianism, his conception. We know the relationship between the normativity of political philosophy and the feasibility of political practice is another challenging issue. Professor King, through a detailed exploration of Confucian public reason, proposed a new reconstruction, which is not just a reinterpretation, but a remaking, a seemingly moderate, but I would say it's a creative or even revolutionary reconstruction. This is truly a true example of what we call 传统的创造性再转化, this critical transformation of tradition, showing a remarkable philosophical treatment and then nuanced handling. I think it is an outstanding contribution to the development of contemporary Confucianism. I would like to raise a question here and hear the Professor King's response. It pertains to the issue of what might be called asymmetry between the thin and the thick. Specifically when compared public reason of liberalism with Confucian public reason in their practical application, their respective advantages and limitations. liberal public reasoning, that's rights-based, their principle being relatively abstract and formalistic, and in a sense, thin. Individual rights and the individual economy are emphasized, place a freedom, but also give a lot of room of freedom, but also place a burden of judgment and choice on the individual. Its shortcoming is obvious, as individuals often struggle with the burden of this kind of freedom. However, its advantage lies in offer more freedom, which implies greater inclusivity and less coercion. In contrast, Confucian public reason, grounded in Confucian moral principle, even if they are moderate, even if it's a moderate perfectionism, it's not mainly formal, but rather substantial, thicker. It provides more moral guidance and make more substantial demand. For instance, 孝敬 filial piety, it's not just an abstract concept. It comes with concrete substantive requirement. So handling some issue may be easier with this Confucian public reasoning, but others can be considerably difficult. I give a concrete example. For instance, in mainland China, there's we call it 催婚现象phenomenon that many parents exert pressure on their children to get married, to have a child, creating a stress for a younger generation. So filial piety 孝敬 in Confucian tradition entails substantive requirement, with Confucianism promoting specific family value, including marriage and child rearing. In this context, what should a Confucian political theory rooted in moral goodness do? Should we propose state provide a specific guidance in such cases? Should the state formulate a corresponding public policy to encourage people get married or have children, which means discriminate some specific life, the way of life, or a specific lifestyle? How can individual rights and certain Confucian substantive values be balanced? It's room for reconciliation on this issue. I would like to hear Professor King's response. Thank you.
Okay, Professor King, please.
Okay, thank you, Professor Liu and my friend Qing, for your very generous reception of my argument, which I really deeply appreciate. Let me start with one of the self reflection of what I think what I was doing, when I was writing this book. I've been long inspired by people like Mengzi, Zhu Xi, Wang Yangming, Wang Zhongxi, Wang Fuji, Gang Yuwei, Yang Gang Yuwei, and Dan Xitong and Yang Jichao, Liang Shuming, later Mo Zhongshan, Dang Junyi, and some Koreans that I'm not going to mention today. And saw myself in this long tradition of progressive or revolutionary Confucianism, at the core of which lies in really respecting, not only serving, but respecting the people. Because if you read this long tradition of Confucianism, you can tell how sincere these great Chinese, Korean Confucians were about the protection and promotion, well-being of the people, and why they struggled so deeply and hard with reforming the existing system in a way that can better protect the people's not only livelihood but also their dignity. And that's why this book starts with the dignity. And then I couldn't survey all the traditional Confucian, but I basically started with Mencius and Sunji. So, but look, people like Dan Shitong, he died at 33 years and very young, and Yang Jichao, 56 years old. They were all students of Kang Yue in one way or another, of course, and they were all immersed in Gongyang tradition. And sometimes, of course, Kang Yue was so radical, people like Dan Shitong and Yang Jichao was so radical, so that people don't want to associate them with Confucian tradition, but deeply when they were young. And through their connection with the Kang Yue, they were very much inspired by Confucian, even when Yang Jichao was critiquing Renjang, the benevolent government, not because the benevolent government is bad in itself, but because the traditional type of a benevolent government is destroying the livelihood of the people and upholding only the interest of the aristocrats and then ruling party, ruling elites, right? So I found quite regrettable that this long tradition of Confucian, what I call Confucian Constitution, was hijacked by some of the pessimists and some of the elitists who do not allow any meaningful political agency for the ordinary people. Like myself, I don't see myself as special. I don't see any of us special because at the end of the day, we are one of those people, and we are somehow educated. I mean, through our efforts and through, by fortune of good environment, we educate ourselves to become university professor, university students, or college graduates, rather than we are coming from heaven and somehow we are communicating with the Tian and empowering ourselves with a special authority or legitimation. So that's where I am. So how can I? And then the problem of this long tradition has been disconnected because of historical contingency, right? Imperialism, colonialization, war, Chinese Civil War, Korean War, all these, unfortunate events prevented us from taking seriously the culture, because we tend to believe the Confucianism was the single greatest obstacle standing in the way of Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese, Japanese modernization, right? And then somehow, we didn't have this luxury to revisit the value of our culture from fresh perspective. That's what I'm trying to do. The unfinished business that was started by this late Qing, early Mingguo period intellectuals, and somehow rejuvenated by people like Mo Zhongshan, Dang Junyi, but disconnected wholesale in Taiwan, Hong Kong, only surviving as an intellectual tradition, but no political relevance whatsoever. Then young generation scholar like me trying to, again, reinstate this moral standing of Confucian or traditional culture, mingling with Western theory and concepts and ideas, and trying to produce something that is interesting and meaningful and exciting, right, for us, because we not only studying Rawls, Habermas, Kant, Mill, Locke, Hobbes, Aristotle, Plato. We do study those people, and we do read Aesop, understand, all these, even Roald Dahl, whatever. At the same time, what's wrong with reading Mengzi, Sunzi, Lunyu, Jushi's writings, Wang Yang's writings, and Huang Yue's writings? Then we can present ourselves as creative cultural amalgam, right? We have one foot communicating with, one hand communicating with our ancestors, and on the other hand, we can freely expressing ourselves to our Western or non-Chinese, non-Korean, non-Japanese friends, and then we can promote very interesting mutual learning and cooperation without completely forshaking our traditional identity. It's not like we are becoming Qing Dynasty Confucians, Qing Dynasty or Ming Dynasty, scholars, but we are trying to reinvent our unique modern identity at the juncture, at our own distinctive historical juncture. Now, back to your question. Absolutely right. Trying to navigate between thick and thin, Confucian civic culture and respect for plurality and of humans and also rights is a precarious talk of war, right?
Yeah.
Because depending on who you are, you can slide down very thick communitarian and perfectionist justification of a state's course of power. Yeah. Or if you slowing off, if you're trying to make yourself closer to liberal rights discourse, then your Confucian identity is gonna be attributed, what the attenuated, the thinner, then somehow it's gonna be very difficult whether for you to claim yourself to be, I don't know whether it's right term, but robust Confucian citizen or theorist, right? This is a very difficult question. It's a perennial question, I think, that is posed to everybody who are engaged in this business. Okay, Confucian political theory. But having said that, I don't want the state to promote Confucian values as such, filial piety as such. What does filial piety, Xiaodi or Xiaoti means? Mean in contemporary China or contemporary Hong Kong or Singapore or South Korea? Even now, even among the scholars, we have a massive disagreement of what filial piety should mean for us, right? Is it right for us to send out elderly parents to this government-run facilities because we're too busy with our own economic lives? We are too busy with raising our one child or two children. We're too busy finding a job that can protect us, our well-being or whatever, right? Or because I'm authentic Confucian, I'm inspired by Jushi, Wang Yangming, Mengzhi, Kongzhi, so I want to adhere to this strictly to this tradition, so that whatever circumstances that I find myself in, I will try to live with my elderly parents. I'll try to support their economic and psychological mental well-being. Fine. I mean, again, depending on who you are, you might have a very different understanding of what filial piety should mean in our contemporary social life. What I'm only trying to say is, I don't want state to define what filial piety should mean in China, because I'm smarter than you guys, because I went to Tsinghua or Huadong Dashi or Renmin or Fudan, Beijing Beda. So you guys shut up and just listen to what we in the elite have to say about what filial piety is about in China. I don't think, or in South Korea, I don't think that's really very productive. But what I'm proposing is a public Confucian public vision, which means, look, we all, regardless of who we are, right? We all take filial piety seriously, for instance, or ritual propriety seriously, because these are important values. Ren, Yi, Ji, all important Chinese Confucian East Asian values. Look, no doubt about that. Who would disagree with the common good, promoting common good? The problem is we disagree with the content of what these goods, what these values consist of, right? Then you have your own values, right? As a more liberal people, little concerned with the gender equality. You are more conservative, person. Depending, or you're Christian, or you're Buddhist, or you're Taoist, or you're atheist, whatever philosophical stance you take, whatever value you take, you're gonna engage with your value with this common good of filial piety, ritual propriety, right? You don't want to dismiss these Confucian goods as if they are completely irrelevant to modern contemporary Chinese life. Rather, we take these values serious. I take these values. I want to become filial son and daughter, and son-in-law and daughter-in-law. Yeah. At the same time, I have this value. I find myself in this particular circumstances, so that I want to develop good reason why I think it's still filial piety, why it's still fulfilling filial piety, when I'm deciding to send my elderly parents to this government-run facility, rather than staying with them and protecting them and providing for them, right? So and then when we discuss, that's why I think the democratic deliberation is extremely important. We offer our Confucian-based, Confucian-mediated public reason, right? Because we have our own private personal reasons, but at the same, we want to be faithful to our Confucian communality, right? And by engaging our private reason with the Confucian values and virtues, mores and moral sentiments, whatever, then we can produce our own distinctive Confucian public reason, and we exchange these public reason in the public open space of the civil society. And sometimes in the last, we just vote, right? And the resulting outcomes, we would consider them Confucian public policy. Okay. Although this is what I could consider public policy, might be very different from the kind of Confucian public policy promoted by Ming Dynasty, Shi, class people, or Qing Dynasty, Mandarin elites, right? Of course, but But still, it might be when we take Confucian values, right, virtues publicly, seriously, in public forum, unlike many Western societies, because many so-called Westerners take filial piety seriously. It's not like they do not value filial piety. They do. I mean, you know, I have many interesting stories about that, but they rarely, if not never, but almost never, in the United States, I mean, we have Nick here, promote filial piety as public value. Supreme Court or American, Congress, House of Congress, don't valorize filial piety as embodying American public spirit, unlike China or South Korea, even now. Okay, whenever we are discussing about adultery, whenever we're discussing about family registry system, family issues, we are unashamed in valorizing Confucian values as public goods, public values, right? Then how can we engage our goods, private values with these public goods? Again, the outcomes of these negotiations, I would call Confucian region, public region, and then even represent Confucian public region in the open space of a civil society, and then in informal public forum, then the outcome is going to be what we call Confucian public policy. Still, what then so-called non-immigrants, okay, radical feminists or liberals would say, why should we take why you take these values as a baseline public negotiation, right? I don't know what to say. I don't think I have a very good answer for that, right? Because just a prudential answer on my part is that, look, we were disconnected from our ancestors. We cannot even read what our grandparents wrote about their lives. Not only because of language barrier, but also because we belong to completely different worlds, right? Americans boasting of their long tradition of democracy, less than 300. But whenever they have problems, they're going back to founding fathers, framers, right? They are very traditionalist in this regard. We cannot going back to even Dan Xitong or Liang Jichao, right? 100 years, we have a massive gap between us and people who existed 100 years ago. I think this is deplorable. I want us to revisit and create this historical rapport between our ancestors, our grandparents. We're not only talking about, Qing dynasty Mandarin or Han dynasty, Tang dynasty. We're talking about our grandparents. Now, I think it's important for us to be able to communicate with them effectively and intelligibly. I think this is important because we didn't choose to disconnect ourselves from our ancestors. We were forced to disconnect ourselves from our ancestors because of our historical contingent events, right? So unless you think Western colonization or civil war were inevitable outcome of Chinese evolution into modern society or Japanese or Korean, then I think it's not unfair to call on us to pay renewed attention to that dimension so that we can give Confucianism, Confucian Chinese culture, Korean culture, Vietnamese culture, an opportunity to reassert itself as one of the viable public philosophical ideas, competing with ideas from Rawls, ideas from Habermas, ideas from Nick Tampio, ideas from anybody or you. That's what I'm arguing. I'm not saying what I'm arguing here in this book or my previous writings is the only way for Chinese people, Korean people to follow. That's presumptuous, that's dangerous, but at least one opportunity, one voice. There's nothing wrong for Confucianism take just one voice so that it can make an appealing argument for the people, so that it's up to the people whether they would buy it or not, but at least we should be able to provide something for people to consider rather than we just forsake or give up, abandon anything that is relating to Confucianism. Okay, I guess that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Okay, thank you. Okay, then we'll move on to the next discussion. So the next discussion is Professor Loubna L. Amine, who teaches political theory with a particular focus on early Chinese political thought. She holds a PhD in politics from Princeton University and a BA in political studies from the American University of Beirut. She's currently an assistant professor in the political science department at Northwestern University. Before that, Professor Amine also taught at Georgetown University and was a Mellon postdoc fellow at the Winnie Humanities Center at Yale University. She also held fellowship from the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Henry Luce Foundation, American Council for Learned Societies. She was also at one point, I believe, affiliated with Zhejiang University and Oxford University. Her first book, Classical Confucian Political Thought, A New Interpretation, was published by Princeton University Press in 2015. She's currently working on her second book. I'm not sure if this is updated, but it should be tentatively titled Beyond Freedom and Slavery, Status and Membership in the Ancient Confucian Political Community. Please, Professor Ellen.
All right, thank you, Professor Sung, for the kind introduction, and thank you, Professor D'Ambrosio, for inviting me to be part of this, and thank you, Professor Kim, for allowing me to engage with your great book. I mean, it's I just want to join everyone else in congratulating you on this formidable achievement. And as Professor D'Ambrosio pointed out, this is in addition to an already impressive list of publications. So yes, congratulations. And I particularly appreciate the approach you have, which you've taken in your other work and which you mentioned in your introductory remarks, of sort of being attentive to the current state of affairs in East Asia, as opposed to just looking at the philosophical texts, which might be at a distance from it, or what you call in this book, the background culture. And in fact, this I'm just going to get into my discussion. I'm going to discuss the pluralism dilemma, which you also mentioned in your opening comment. So, Kim describes the two horns of what he calls the pluralism dilemma as follows. The first horn is what he calls the pluralist demand. And that is made up of two features. One is that a society is made up of different groups with incompatible moral and religious views. And the second aspect of the pluralist demand is that a democratic society, as a democratic system, needs to accommodate these various groups and religious views, with various religious and moral views. The second horn of the dilemma is what he calls the Confucian demand, namely that a Confucian democratic theory needs to give a privileged place to Confucianism over other comprehensive doctrines. And so you get the tension between those two. So basically, Kim's contention is that the dilemma is normally solved by giving up on the second horn, meaning the Confucian demand, right? By privileging the pluralist demand and sort of assuming that the state has to be neutral, or at least has to be, it cannot be sort of Confucian in any way. And here he mentions the work of two scholars who do this kind of sort of privileging the pluralist demand over the Confucian demand, namely Franz Mang and Li Zhuoyao. And Kim's main contention against them is that they miss the distinctive ways in which Confucianism operates as a comprehensive doctrine. And the argument here is that these scholars and others operate on the basis of John Rawls's conception of comprehensive doctrine. He came up with this idea. And Kim argues that there's something kind of problematic about the view in itself, the conception of comprehensive doctrine, or aspects of it are problematic. And so Kim's argument is that, in fact, Confucianism comes in different forms today, as it also historically has come in different forms, and that one of these forms, which he calls civic Confucianism, is able to meet both the Confucian demand and the pluralist demand because of its, let's just call it, its light hand and its encompassing nature. So I kind of want to push on this a little bit, and I'll do so by kind of getting to aspects of the argument, including discussion of Rawls's conception of comprehensive doctrine. More basically, what I want to, I'm wondering whether there is a cost in sort of the solution that is proposed here. And basically, the cost is the dilution of the idea of Confucian. So how much does Confucianism retains a distinctive contribution to democratic theory when it's sort of given this kind of a civic Confucian aspect. And so you might actually say that perhaps we have something we can call a Confucianism dilemma. So the more Confucianism is distinctive, the less compatible it's going to be with the pluralist demand. And the cost of compatibility is that Confucianism itself becomes less distinctive as a qualifier. Now, I think Kim has a few answers to this worry. I think he's kind of preempting it in various aspects. So let me just work through a couple of them. So in his discussion, Kim perceptively notes that Rawls makes a distinction between full and partial comprehensive doctrines. And interestingly, I hadn't actually noticed it. It's quite interesting, I found. And that in fact, it seems like this is something that Rawls should do more with, but in some sense he doesn't, meaning he doesn't quite make it clear what makes a comprehensive doctrine partial and why the distinction matters. But then Kim also shows that although he doesn't quite do much with the distinction, he does use the idea of Rawls does use the idea of partial comprehensive doctrines to make an argument that in fact is crucial for his theory, namely the argument that the stability of political liberalism hinges on the fact that most comprehensive doctrines are in fact partial. So the argument, and I'm quoting Kim here, quote, the partially comprehensive nature of most comprehensive doctrines is what allows them to support from within and develop an allegiance to the political conception of justice. And Kim calls this kind of aspect in the Rawlsian account the vertical view. Then I think Kim very nicely then takes this opening in Rawls to kind of propose viewing Confucianism itself as a variation that is also like a partial comprehensive doctrine. So using that distinction in Rawls to kind of open up space to think about partial comprehensive doctrines as a way to sort of think about differences in existing comprehensive doctrines. So in this way, civic Confucianism is different from other fully comprehensive versions of Confucianism, is different from other fully comprehensive doctrines in general. Because it is only partially comprehensive, civic Confucianism, Kim argues, is likely to interact actively with other comprehensive doctrines, leading to the kind of syncretism that is characteristic of East Asia, which also I think is a nice point that it's a feature of East Asia that it's nice to sort of bring out. And Kim describes this as the horizontal view, as opposed to the vertical view that Rawls uses to show the importance of partial comprehensive doctrines as relating to the political conception of justice. What Kim is doing is to say, look, these partial comprehensive doctrines actually help in terms of like their compatibility with other comprehensive doctrines, not necessarily with political conception of justice that is separate from all of them. Now, one quick point I want to make here, and this is just based on reading your discussion of Rawls here, is that I found it interesting that Rawls refers to the partially comprehensive nature of most comprehensive doctrines. So it seems that he thinks that most comprehensive doctrines are partial. And this is interesting because he doesn't seem to worry that this would weaken any argument that he has for the need for political liberalism. Right. So the partiality doesn't seem to sort of worry him, or in his sense to kind of lessen the force of the worry about comprehensive doctrines in general. So this is just a note to sort of so I would take it that on Rawls' own account, just pointing to comprehensive doctrine as being itself partial wouldn't do that. That wouldn't change that much. This said, I mean, we don't have to accept Rawls' account of this. We can say, look, there is something interesting about partial comprehensive doctrines, and that we can do more with this. So let me just then say a bit more about what I take Kim's argument about in the way in which civic Confucianism is a partial comprehensive doctrine. So in a couple of times, he characterizes it as being characterized by values like, I'm quoting him, benevolence, valuable relationships, trust, filial piety, which just came up in the discussion, ritual propriety, respect for elders, and harmony. He also writes that its kernel lies not necessarily in specific beliefs and doctrines, I'm also quoting here, but in social practices such as ancestor worship and ritual propriety. Again, things that came up right now. Now, as they say, the devil lies in the detail here. So what do we mean? I'm sorry. So the devil lies in the detail here, right? So how how specific do you want to get about about those? And this picks up, I think, on Professor Leo's sort of question that was just asked. So just sort of a simple kind of worry one could express is that these kind of features, so filial piety, respect for elders, ancestor worship, various aspects of ritual priority, are normally combined with patriarchal patterns of reverence. Do we want to take this on? I think clearly Professor Kim doesn't want to take this on. He is very clear that gender inequality is not something that civic Confucianism espouses. But then can this gender sort of dimension of these practices be easily disentangled from them? And do they stay the same thing when we do that? But even leaving the gender question aside, it poses its own distinctive challenges. I think basically the concern is that the more substance we give to these ideals, the less likely they might seem to in fact integrate in horizontal ways with other, even partial comprehensive doctrines. And let me just wrap up by making one point here that is just relevant to discussion. In his discussion, sort of Professor Kim makes a distinction between what he calls oppression and then offense. And I think it's a completely reasonable idea that in fact, offense is not it's not a main issue. It's that we need to worry about oppression. There's no oppression here. But I wonder whether there's a space for something we can call coercion. It's neither oppression nor offense. So just to kind of throw an example out there, say the state taxes everyone in this Confucian democracy. So everyone is taxed in order to subsidize practices of ancestor worship. And everyone has to pay so that the civic Confucians engage in ancestor worship. Is that allowed on the system? I mean, that's not oppression. It's not offense either. It's a form of coercion. Taxation can be viewed as a form of coercion, right? Non-civic Confucians might not really want to pay for this kind of thing. Is this something that is allowed on this view? Is not allowed? And again, the point I'm pushing here is the more we allow this, the more we do have a problem with the Confucian demand, right? The less we allow for this, then it's unclear to me how substantive those Confucian practices are going to remain. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So it's almost 10:15. So when Professor Kim and Loubna, if you have discussed 10 minutes, I will raise the raise hand button to just give you a signal. I won't interrupt you, then you know you have to wrap up. Okay.
Okay, Loubna, always a pleasure to discuss with you about whatever I write. And I'm also very pleased whenever I'm reading your work and discussing about very important topics of mutual interest. Again, as usual, you raise very important questions for not only about this work, but about entire intellectual project that I'm engaged in. So I appreciate that. So your core question has a good connection with what Qing has already raised, but you now asking me specifically what would be possibly the cost of civic Confucianism, right? And how specific I want to go, and even if I might have some argument against these charges of oppression offense, but what about coercion? Okay. Okay, let me start with the partial comprehension doctrine. Okay, some of the audience here might not be very familiar with Rhodes' idea of a partial comprehension doctrine, but let me just give you a brief, short lecture about what's at stake. So, according to Rhodes, I mean, we are living in a pluralist society, and we are faced with a lot of social problems, especially social economic inequalities. Right. So in order to come up with or derive principles of justice or political conception of justice that can be agreed by all members of society, regardless of who you are, whether rich or poor, whether men and women, whether Christian, non-Christian, regardless of who you are, the only way we can derive these principles of justice, political conception of justice, is to put on a veil of ignorance. We just put on some mask and then we pretend as if we don't know who we are. And then we put ourselves in what he calls the original position, again, where we don't know who we are. Then we are all agreeing on two principles of justice. The first principle stipulates that the basic rights, opportunities should be, basic rights should be distributed equally regardless of who you are. And second, social and economic injustice justified to the extent that it maximizes the interest of the least or worst of individuals in our society. Again, this is a very interesting argument he initially proposed in his first book, Theory of Justice, but then in his second book, Political Liberalism, he complicates the whole situation because we're not only faced with socioeconomic inequalities, which was his major concern in the first book, but also we are finding ourselves in the society that is marked by value pluralism. That's the problem. So in order to do so, what he proposed is something like that. Okay, we're gonna throw out Vader, we're gonna put ourselves on the original position. We're gonna agree on two principles of justice. The problem is in our society, Christians may not. Okay, because when we going back to actual situation where we know we are Christians, where we know we are rich, we are poor, we are men and women, why do we have to embrace these principles of justice that have been agreed upon in this hypothetical so-called original position? Rawls argues that because we are reasonable, as long as we are reasonable, we're gonna come up with a so-called overlapping consensus. This, while you retain your Christian identity, while you retain your Buddhist identity, while you're retaining your whatever identity based on your own comprehensive doctrine, nevertheless, for whatever reason, as you see fit, you're gonna embrace these principles of justice. And then we can have this overlapping consensus without suppressing our value diversity. Okay, this is what, and why we as a Christian or Buddhist, why we can embrace this political conception of justice, because our Christian doctrine, our Buddhist doctrine has a certain, there's a porosity, there is a certain room for it to engage with this political conception of justice. That's why I call this vertical justification, vertical relationship, okay? So Buddhists don't care why Christians accept these justice, principle justice. Christians don't care why Buddhists accept the principle justice. Muslims don't care why Christians, Buddhists accept the principle justice, as long as we, all the members of society, accept the principle justice for different reasons. That's okay. That's what partial. Why we can do that? Because our comprehensive doctrine is partial. It's not really tightly controlling ourselves as if we are Christians, so that we can never communicate whatsoever with other, this political conception of justice. That's what Rawls is trying to take advantage of with this partiality of the idea of partiality of comprehensive doctrine. What I'm trying to argue in my book was, look, if that's the case, why don't we take advantage of the partiality of comprehensive doctrine in terms of its communicating interactions with other comprehensive doctrines in the civil society? So, for instance, I might be Confucian, especially in the Confucian society. I'm not sure whether it makes sense in the American society, but at least in Chinese, Korean, Japanese, Vietnamese society, I believe it makes sense. Look, I'm Confucian man or woman, but I go to church. I'm also Presbyterian or Methodist or Lutheran. I have no problem. Many Chinese, arguably, many Vietnamese, especially many Koreans and Japanese are Christians and Buddhist, Taoist, Catholic Christians, Presbyterian Christian, Methodist, Southern Baptist, whatever. But they have their own comprehensive doctrines, in other words, okay? But when American stranger, visitor, comes to South Korea, they find many Koreans have something in common, okay? They are very different from we Americans. They are very different from we French people. They are very different from we German people. What brings these otherwise different Koreans holding very different comprehensive doctrines into this Korean identity, this Chinese identity? Again, I'm just speaking very generally, okay? That I would say it has to do with the Confucianism that we share as a civic value in our society. Okay, so it's a very challenging, almost impossible to think of a Muslim Christian. Can you imagine Muslim and Christian? Does it make sense? It doesn't make any sense in the American context. If somebody say, "What's your religion?" I'm subscribed to both Christianity and Muslim. Doesn't make any. I'm Jewish Buddhist. Doesn't make any sense. Okay, in American context. So when liberal theorists theorizing comprehensive doctrine and its relationship with the other comprehensive doctrine, it's got to be incommensurable. There should be no commonality between these doctrines, because these doctrines are imagined as kind of a denomination-based, doctrine-based, church-based, institution-based religious practice. Or theism. Well, we have one God. My God cannot be shared with other, because that's what, you know, 10 Commandments, the first commandment is about. I mean, you cannot worship another God. But Confucianism, look, many Confucians, you know, in my definition, many civic Korean Confucians go to church, somebody go to Taoist temple. Even you go to, you know, Taiwan, Taipei, Longshansha, or any church or any temple in mainland China and in Japan and South Korea and Taiwan, you know, whatever you call it, you know, Chinese Taipei, whatever. You go to Buddhist temple, but if you go backside of the temple, then you see Guan Yu statue, you know, that kind of Taoist statue, and you there's no problem, you know. And many Christians go to Confucius temple, many Christians go to Buddhist temple, pray for their parents' longevity, their children's entrance examination, no problem. And there are lots of empirical research by Son and many people, you know, the Sebastian Billiard, showing that Chinese people have no problem with the dual, triple, quadruple identities, unlike American Jewish person or American, you know, Southern Baptist, American Lutheran guy who never allows himself to hold multiple identities. You know, I go to church next week, I go to this week, I go to, you know, synagogue next week, I go to, you know, mosque. That makes no sense. That means you are not sincere about your own religious faith, right? That we can hardly see it in Korea. That's why in China, historically speaking, we rarely, I'm not saying never, we rarely had wars of religion at all. We almost at all. You know, during Tang Dynasty, I mean, Dang Taizhong, I mean, the Dang, you know, Dang Taizhou and Dang Taizhong, these people arguably came from northern nomadic tribe, Shenbi, right? Northern nomadic tribe, and they created Tang Dynasty, and of course, Tang Dynasty considered as a Han people there. But then they were very attracted to Buddhism, right? And they killed about 800 the Taoist monks. That's one of the biggest religious persecution in Chinese history. Okay, in Korea, when Catholicism was introduced about late 16th and then 17th century, and it was quite popular amongst not only ordinary lay people, but also some aristocratic ladies and even men during mid 18th century. Confucians had no problem, and very many elite Confucians had no problem studying, you know, Catholicism and going to this seminary, you know, meetings, and they were reinterpreting Catholicism in Confucian terms, no problem. But then, for political reason, there was a couple of times religious persecution, but only several hundred people were killed. In Korean history, that's massive religious persecution. Throughout Western modern history, millions, tens of millions of people were killed because of religious conflict. We didn't have so what I'm trying to say is that we have many Korean Buddhists, we have many Confucian Buddhists, we have many Confucian Christian, we have many Confucian you know, Taoists, we have many Confucian Muslim in Korea, in Japan. I think that's the beauty of Confucius. That's one of the greatest attractions of Confucianism, capable of mingling with the people subscribing to other accomplished doctrines. Roger one wasn't able to understand, let alone appreciate this dimension of accomplished doctrine, because his default position was with reference to Christianity and Catholicism and medieval Christian faith, and that's why he was using, you know, the great execution and great inquisitor and you know, kind of thing. I think Confucianism has much more space to be, or capacious space to be engaged productively with individuals who otherwise hold different ideas and values and ways of life and doctrines. And that, I think, that's one of the main arguments I was trying to make with reference the idea of partial accomplished doctrine, because Confucianism is very open-ended, and anybody, again, even now, depending on who you are, you think at the heart of Confucianism is a filial piety. You think at the heart of Confucianism, Ren. What do you mean by Ren? Benevolence. What is benevolence? We're all debating, and historically, scholars debating about the very specific content of a particular ritual practices. And that's why after Jewish demise, and many of Jewish followers in Korea, in China, produced many ritual books, because there's no way to pin down what good ritual practice is about. Depending on who you are, you produce many different kind of ritual books that provide people with specific social identities. Again, it's open-ended practice, right? There's no church, there's no inquisition, there's no kind of witch hunting. Although obviously, depending on certain specific political circumstances, something bad or horrendous really happened, occasionally. But I cannot say Confucianism can be understood in that term. Going back to, so finally, coercion. Okay, when Americans, now we're going to have an election, Trump might become, Republican candidate. When if you're champions of a Republican Party and if you're supporters of Trump, and then now you saw, leader from the oppositional party, the Democratic Party becoming American president, turning over all the policies the Republican Party was driving, or had been driving for the past 4 or 5 years. Nobody would say, therefore, the election should be null and void because I'm forced to abide by Republican public policy. Nobody. Even there are many, not many, but very good number of communists residing in North America, in Canada and United States of America. They might say, the liberal democratic policy, the American public polity is promoting, is structurally causing them to conduct themselves according to the belief that they actively fight against. But nobody, as far as I can tell, would say, therefore, American liberal constitution is coercive, therefore it's got to be turned over. Nobody would say. What I'm trying to say is that as long as the Confucian public religion has been processed on equal terms in the public space, civil society, and formal public space, including legislature. That's why I think chapters 4, 5, 6 are extremely important for me, because those institutions provide us with those forum where public Confucian religion can be discussed, vetted, and then the resulting outcomes can be embraced as more or less legitimate, if not perfectly legitimate. And then those are disagreeing with this particular way public identity has been defined in this round of debate, have another opportunity to regenerate another round of debate and maybe able to turn that decision down or upside down or turn it around. Okay, so coercion is inevitable in human society, political community, where we have numerous individuals, transacting with one another. But coercion itself is not bad. It's just inevitable thing that politics, the political, is allowing us to consider seriously. And as long as those coercive power is exercised in a way that can be acceptable, if not completely embraced, but acceptable to the reasonable people who are now guided by Confucian public religion, in my view, I think coercion itself wouldn't create insurmountable problem. Although it's a very, very important problem, Loubna, I acknowledge. Problem of coercion is extremely important, and many Confucian theorists tend to dismiss this dimension of politics because, really need a good communitarianism, richer aesthetic relationship, all good. We can get over with the rights discourse. I think this is just naive, but this problem of coercion is extremely important. I think for that, I really grateful. Your insight, I'm really grateful. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Professor Amine and Professor Kim. Okay, so our last discussion, Professor Nicholas Tampio, who is a professor of political science at Fordham University. He researches the history of political thought, contemporary political theory, and education policy. He has published books on a range of topics. They include Kantian Courage, Advancing the Enlightenment in Contemporary Political Theory, Deleuze's Political Vision, Common Core, National Education Standards, and the Threat to Democracy, Learning versus the Common Core, and most recently, I believe, Teaching Political Theory, a Pluralistic Approach. So Professor Tampio often writes for public-facing outlets as well, such as the Boston Globe, USA Today, and the Washington Post. And his articles have been translated into many languages, I believe 14 languages. His Eon essay, Look Up From Your Screen, is included in the Norton Reader alongside essays by Maya Angelou, Frederick Douglass, and Benjamin Franklin. So I'll pass the time to Professor Tampio.
Great. I'm very happy to be here. It's wonderful to see old friends Sungmoon and Loubna, and it's wonderful to meet the other professors, and maybe someday I hope to see many of you in person. So it was a real pleasure for me to be invited to be part of this book symposium. Sungmoon and I, we have things in common and we have things that are different. What we have in common is that we both are thinking about how to make our cultures more democratic. So I'm in America and I write about education, and I often think about how we can make the American education more democratic, teach democratic habits. And so what's wonderful about reading Sungmoon's work is that I learn about sort of similar concerns, but in a different place. So I've read this and I feel like I'm still reading it, right? Because so many of like to really read it, you need to read Mengsa and Chunsa and Kangsa. And then, there's a wonderful little history in the beginning of the book. So there's many, many more authors I need to read. So this is the beginning of a conversation. So thank you, Sungmoon, for your hard work and excellent scholarship. So I'll put my questions in the chat and then I'll explain them a little bit. So I have 3 questions. 1, are you a political constructivist? 2, why Shunsa? And 3, why reason? Okay, so I'll explain a little bit and then I would like to hear your thoughts on these. So one thing I think you and I both have in common is that we're political constructivists, and the way that political constructivism works, it's lecture 3 in Rawls's Political Liberalism. I wrote a little article for contemporary political theory called The Defense of Political Constructivism. And the general idea is that you don't take arguments from pure reason and then make principles that you then apply. That's the old-fashioned Kantian, and Rawls was getting away from that. And his approach was that you take ideas from the public political culture and rework them in a more systematic, coherent way, maybe to make them more democratic. So, I mean, I sort of assume that you are a political constructivist. I mean, so my questions are sort of inside baseball, just expert knowledge. What are you thinking when you use political constructivism in this book? And so one of the main puzzles I had from this book, and I really thought was wonderful, is this little section, a Shunzian case for egalitarian human dignity. Shunzi's an authoritarian, right? You acknowledge that he's an authoritarian, right? So for this workshop, I was also reading parts of theorizing Confucian virtue politics, and you call him an authoritarian, right? And I mean, Loubna and Professor Sung can jump in and say whether they think he's an authoritarian, but I think he's an authoritarian, right? I mean, the image of the crooked bamboo that the state needs to flat. I mean, you cannot have a more authoritarian view. I mean, I love reading Shunsa because he's very profound, but anti-democratic and anti-liberal. So I really feel like he's the deep, like if you want a deep criticism of things I believe, I read Shunsa. So I'm very perplexed why you want to make Shunsa a good guy. And, I mean, I think in this room, I don't know if, Peng Yu is here and Tao Jiang, I mean, they're going to Zhuangsa. And that strikes me as making a lot of sense, right? Because it's ordinary people who become honored and are sources of wisdom, and, Cripple Shu and little birds and little frogs, and right. So that I think that Zhuangsa is a much better candidate. And so I want to know why you did Shunsa, why you're trying to recuperate him. And then just my last question is, I'm glad to hear your beginning that you're Korean, that there's democracy in Korea, and yet there's this Confucian tradition and Confucian culture, and you want to make some connection to the past. You don't just simply want American ideas and institutions. So that's good. That's a big assignment, and I understand why you write a lot of books and articles, because there's a lot of different facets to it. But I wonder why you talk about Confucian public reason. And my concern about reason is that it's math, right? Like that's the idea. That's why Kant used reason. right? So the categorical imperative is like the principle of non-contradiction in logic. And the idea of math is that it transcends time and place. You can't argue with it, right? So Kant really was trying to put philosophy on the same level as math. And that's why philosophers love him, right? Because he elevates their work into kind of a science rather than just storytelling. But you know, I mean, why Confucian public reason? Why do you want? I mean, does Confucius make that? I mean, I was just teaching Confucius this past week, and we were reading about upright gong. You know, a father who, son who covers for the father. So it's not the categorical imperative. It's not reason. So, but yet you want to use reason. So I would love to hear your thinking about why you talk about Confucian public reason rather than Confucian habits or Confucian ethics or something like that. Those are my questions. I can elaborate, but I'll just pass it over to you.
Okay, Professor Kim.
Oh, fascinating. I think all three questions are very interesting. I think you're on the right spot, especially with regard to the third question, but still the first two questions are also very interesting. So let me start with the third question because it's more substantive than the first two questions. Okay, why reason? Okay, so why not? that's my, because we can think of reason not only with reference to Kant, math, logic, the coldness, callousness, but also with reference to people like Hume, right? Hume defines reason as basically passion. In terms of passion, he thinks there's no, it doesn't have to be, reason doesn't have to be categorically distanced from or distinguished from passion and human moral sentiments themselves. So in my first book, which Loubna kind of reviewed years ago, Confucian Democracy in East Asia, Theory and Practice, I construct my Confucian idea of reason in reference to Mencius. Mencius is the idea of moral sentimentalism, how we can develop, because the problem with Kantian reasoning, it has to do with the source of motivation. What would motivate, Kantian reason to be engaging to the people? People like Joshua Cohen and Kantian liberals say reasoning stuff had this motivating force to be engaged. And people like the Tim Scallon would have no problem with the reason motivating stuff to be relevant to our public judgment. I think that's a weak argument. I mean, in my view, reason, in that regard, I agree with Hume that reason should be embedded in, rooted in our moral sentiments, because I think the sentiments which are internal to us can motivate us to be sensitive to the problems of justice, injustice, right? And that's where reason becomes relevant, but also important. So, and practically, that's one. Practically, I think one of the many of my friends in the field pay not only they do not pay enough attention to rights, but also they do not pay enough attention to reason, because they tend to think Confucianism, which is based on ritualism and relational stuff, is almost categorically fundamentally at odds with reason-based argument, because they tend to associate reason with top-down reality, whether either utilitarianism or Kantian deontology. That's how they understand reason. But again, I think we can construct reason. I mean, going back to your first question, construct reason with reference to Mencian or Humean moral sentimentalism, and I think we can have a much more interesting idea of reason that can motivate us to be more publicly spirited. That's where I'm coming from. And again, but also, because of this valorization rituals and relationality and communality and organic relationship between self and society, they rarely discuss about the importance of public deliberation. You're Duyan and I'm Duyan as well. It's extremely important for us to be able to engage productively with the people who have different views. The problem here in Korea, well, arguably China and Japan, traditionally, and even now arguably, is that we don't have a cultural education that enables us to offer reasons. I mean, in a very colloquial sense, daily sense, offer reasons in a way that can be acceptable to others who do not necessarily agree with us. Either it's just burst of our anger or certain emotions, outburst of emotions, or it's just top-down kind of a order or command by our charismatic leaders. It's very, and when we are talking about region, always in Korea and in China, I guess, as well, it's all about, as if region is all about Western tradition. But if you look at the way Korean philosophers or Chinese philosophers during medieval period, I mean, Song Dynasty, Korea's Joseon Dynasty, when they are engaging in very sophisticated philosophical debate about human nature and metaphysics, Li and Qi, and moral self-cultivation, mesmerizingly complex argument they are engaging in, arguably much more complex than Kantian noumena, Kantian, theory. They are for reason. And they are respectively engaged in the reason-giving, reason-taking argument for years. And then we have a long tradition of this debate. It's 4-7 debate in Korea, or Horak debate, whether humans have the same nature, or sages have a different nature, whether humans have the same nature with the non-human animals. Very sophisticated philosophical debates by giving reasons. But these reasons are not just logical, math-based, calculative. No, it's based on very developed emotions, cultivated emotions, or moral sentiments. So I think we have no reason to object to reason, as if reason is only fettered with utilitarianism or Kantian deontology. We can revisit much richer resources of reason throughout Eastern and Western history and philosophical, political, and cultural traditions. And one of again self-imposed tasks for me was to develop the attractive, appealing idea of reason that can be embraced by East Asian people of Confucian heritage. Again, I also have a problem with this top-down universalist reason that doesn't pay attention to specificity of our situations and circumstances. But I do believe the kind of reason that we can reconstruct from Mengshan and Sunjian, because although Sunji doesn't believe in the existence of innate morality or innate moral sentiments, but he do believe in once we reform ourselves into a moral person, the most important thing for him as well is to develop moral sentiments like Ren and Yi, the righteousness and benevolence, and that's what define the sages or sage kings who, when they engage in punitive expectations, whatever, against the tyrannies and bad rulers. I think that's the reason we can think of different kinds of reason. So Sunji has been disparaged in the tradition because of his rivalry with Mencius. Mencius believed in the goodness of human nature in the sense that we are born with these moral sprouts, moral sentiments. And then at the center of moral self-cultivation lies developing these sprouts, literally sprouts out moral sentiments and become better, okay? Sunji thought, if we are born with inborn human nature, why do we need education? Why do we need teachers? Why do we need this richer institution that Mencius himself takes very seriously? So Sunji thought, as long as we take rulership and education and richer institutions seriously, which is what Confucius and Mencius valorized, then logically he thought we should stipulate that human nature is bad, in the sense that it's not in the Augustinian sense, but in the sense that we are not born with moral sprouts. But still, he believed the possibility of moral perfection by changing, by working hard with our bad human nature and transforming it into good nature, right? That's artificial redevelopment of human nature, and we can become like sages. So at the end of the day, what the vision, Confucian vision, Sunji valorized is not very different from what Confucius and Mencius valorized. He started from different starting point, but at the end of the day, he arrived at the same conclusion. So it's not because Sunji valorized or advocate authoritarian state. If you just look at Confucius' ideal state or Mencius' ideal state, and if you apply contemporary or normative standard, they're all advocating some sort of one-man monarch. And then none of them advocated democracy. None of them were paying attention to any kind of democratic collective decision-making process. None of them, supported a collective self-rule. None of them. That's what people like Gang Yue and Yang Chichao and Dan Shitong 100 years ago were trying to do by reinventing Confucianism. Okay, but Sunji's stigma has very little to do with his political theory, because as far as his political theory, there is a very important but subtle difference between him and Mencius and others. But obviously Sunji also believed that the government exists to protect and promote well-being of the people, but he thought that to make people morally enhanced, it requires much more complex institutional and educational structure than what Mencius thought, and that's why he came up with a much lengthier, much complex institutional argument to lay down Confucian, in my view, constitutional structure. Because if we follow this optimist view of human nature, then at the end of the day, Sunji thought we don't need this complex institutional structure that has been valorized in other texts, like richer texts that were believed to be written or at least redacted by Confucius. So why do we need these marginalizing richer manuals if it's all about just developing your moral sprouts? So Sunji thought that Mencius somehow missed something very important in the tradition, and he wanted to withdraw attention that dimension. But again, if you look at Sunji from contemporary perspective, of course, Sunji, Mencius, all of them are not democratic, they are authoritarian, but like Akshat or one of your own teachers, Richard Flathman, the modern champions of Hobbes. I mean, of course, Hobbes, depending on who you are, Hobbes is authoritarian, but Dick Flathman and Akshat made a great argument to make Akshat a harbinger of American liberalism, right? I mean, so historical Sunji being authoritarian, maybe, I mean, we're talking about 500 years ago, right? But my task is to revisit some part of his argument and render it intelligible to modern people and reinvent his progressive dimension of his political thought in a way that can be relatable to us. That's what I'm trying to do. That's what Dick Flathman and Akshat did with reference to the Hobbes. So in that regard, I'm political constructivist, right? So I'm not simply rejuvenating what ancient or medieval Confucians believed in. What I'm trying to do is to engage their thought with the kind of Confucian legacy that we have inherited in our laws and social and political discourses and practices, and trying to reproduce something, again, that is relatable to young generation in East Asia who have otherwise strong doubts about our own tradition, because from their teachers who have nothing constructive to learn about our own tradition. I want to correct this bias, because we have a lot of interesting to say about our tradition, lots of bad things about our tradition as well, about gender inequality, androcentrism, patriarchal order, patrilineal, many things, of course. But just like marriage, I'm always using marriage. I mean, I love this girl, and I got married this lady, okay? But past 14 years or 15 years, I have a lot of problem with this person who otherwise I love. But then the beauty of marriage is working out, right? It's not like a Cinderella story. You gotta work it out. There are some challenges, there are some beauties, but at the end of the day, it's your virtue. That's what makes your relationship beautiful and virtuous, right? Tradition has a lot of dimensions and problems and good things. But what you have to do is try to make it work it out, make work it out, right? You work it out to make it appealing to younger generation people who are greatly skeptical of their ability to communicate with their ancestors. That's why they don't read their ancient, medieval, or modern texts. They have no desire to immerse themselves in these resources. They only look to Western intellectuals or Western theories. Again, I love Rawls, I love Dworkin, I love Gardner, my own teacher, Ben Barber. I love their teacher like Dewey. I love them. But at the same time, there is no reason to disparage our own ancestors simply because we have this prejudice. We have to revisit whether what we believe, what we take for granted is really can stand reason. So in that regard, I'm political constructivist, and then that's what many good modern, contemporary, modern Confucian, political theorist atheists were trying to do, reconstructing the tradition in a way that can be appealing to their own generation. Okay, thank you so much.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we have about 10 minutes left. Maybe I'll first ask if there are any questions from the audience. Does anyone have a question that you would like to ask? Okay, I don't see any immediate hands up, so I would use the time to ask my question. All right, thank you, Professor Kim. Yeah, so I completely echo what the other discussants have said. I really feel very touched by this book, the effort you have put in. Okay, so just cut to the chase. I have a question about ritual and pluralism. So this is a question that's puzzled me, not so much from the political theory angle, but just as a whole, like in this increasingly pluralistic society, people ritual is the kind of thing that it takes years and years to build up, and then it's not a rule, so people have to be immersed in the practice, and people have to know the expectation, like when to send a gift, what to wear. And then so when in this increasing pluralistic society, when people have different expectation, how, so the two questions, how do we have like a ritual that we can also engage with like different cultural groups or minority, that we still can signal to each other what we're trying to do, but we might not have enough history and time to build up like a common language for signaling. That's one question. And also another thing is that you talk about public reason giving, and which is very important. But then sometimes I think ritual, like the beauty of it, and maybe also the shortcoming of it, is that it's like a shortcut. It's like it bypass reason. Like since young in a Confucian society, we teach the kids, you just do the ritual. Like parents are not very good at offering reason to their kids why we're doing that. But maybe when the kids grow up, they start to reflect and they start to think, I understand finally why my grandparents forced me to do that. But then reason and ritual sometimes they are not so compatible, because the ritual, it seems to bypass reasoning. So I wonder if like sometimes it cut in the way. And the third related question is friendship. So I wonder, like in light of these, this is just a thought of mine, I'm just curious what you think. So I know like early Confucian tradition, it also talk about you, friends, but it's not as prominent as the other relationship and like the other virtue. But we know that in ancient Greece, that probably has a longer tradition, that their friendship, the civic friendship, is in the forefront, how important it is. So perhaps I wonder if like Yo is already there as one of the key relationships, but maybe it doesn't get discussed as much. We can take this relationship, friendship to the forefront, and maybe through friends, the values you kind of calibrate, you kind of in sync your values, and then that's how we build up expectations and ritual practices. That's all. Thank you.
Oh, Winnie, thank you so much for very exciting, very important question, ritual. I mean, I struggled with this question in chapter 3, I think, when I was talking about moral disagreement. But look, so let me cut the chase first. Reason, and that goes back to Nick's question as well. Why ritual? I mean, okay, reason, ritual do not seem to get along with each other, right? And that's why people like J.J. Pocock, I mean, one of the most important, modern, historian of political thought, Pocock, when he read Nanyang, Analects of Confucius, he was fascinated by this power of non-linguistic power of ritual. And in Pocock said, this is the most Machiavellian text that I've read because, the language, guy, boy, I always, hey, you bring my pencil. Dad, why do I have to do that? You do it. Come on, you're younger than me. I'm old. Please bring it. If you use the language, then language can be understood in a very different way, right? So it's very important, very difficult to, exert your course, your power, because people would sabotage, people would take advantage of your own linguistic, people, whatever, but ritual, you know what you're supposed to do. Your body just automatically follows a certain kind of rhythmic kind of course of action that has been educated or pre-cultivated, right? You just simply do what you're supposed to do. And again, Pocock, that's why Fingret was fascinated by ritual. He's a linguist, a scholar of language and linguist scholar, and he was Wittgenstein. He was so much fascinated by this idea of ritual. Pocock, Pocock produced this influential article in about 1964 or 5, and then Fingret published his Master of Confucian Sacred in 1972. What's the relevance of ritual in this pluralist society? Look, if we go to Taipei, if we go to Seoul, if we go to Japan, our politicians all yelling at each other, fighting each other. We are very polarized. Taiwanese politics, Korean politics, more polarized than American politics, arguably. Okay, the Minjindang, Kuomintang, the Korean, Conservative Party and the Progress Party, crazy. Okay, with regard to social justice and then welfareism and attitude toward North Korea. It's an attitude toward the mainland China in Taipei, in Taiwan's case. It's a very, very polarized society that we are talking about, actually, right? But why do we have to? Then how we bring ourselves to this productive public conversation as politicians, as citizens? I think ritual can provide us with a subjunctive space where we just forget, right? What is ritual? Now, I don't want to, as a Christian, I have nothing to do with the Muslim. I have nothing to do with the Muslim, okay? I don't like Muslim neighbor. I don't like, as a Muslim, I don't like Christian neighbor. I don't like Buddhist neighbor. I don't like, but you know what? What is a ritual? Forget about your religious background. What is important? Whether he is older than you, then you bow. You shake hand, you bow. Say hello, you bow. You ought to express your right respect for your elderly neighbor, right? And so this is different word. Somehow, even if you don't like people holding different values and ways of life or comprehensive doctrines, or Christian versus Buddhist, in Korean case, but then ritual turn things around and you see your relationship completely different perspective. Just like it's similar to public space in American society. Look, you bring your stroller and go to a public park. You don't ask whether you meet the parents who another groups of those parents who bring their own children, toddlers, whether they are Christians, whether they went to Harvard or Princeton, whether they went to community college or they are middle school group. You don't ask their background. You just say hello. We just mingle with others, right? And then you cultivate your civic friendship with them because you don't care about their religious, social, ethnic, class backgrounds. That's the beauty of a public space. Ritual provides us with that kind of public space where we can still maintain certain type of deference, meaningful deference in social, and the kind of relationship that we traditionally cherish. But when we come back to and then we have a very interesting egalitarianism because we don't have to care about money. We don't have to care about your religious social background. You only care about your religious standing, right? Whether you're old. And then anyhow, that encourages you to pay attention to whatever they have to say about important public matters. And then you pretend as if you just bracket off those kind of problems that stand in the way of effective communication. Again, the problem is we don't have a ritual education anymore in China, Singapore, Hong Kong, in South Korea, because we don't know what rituals are. We somehow practice those rituals in Korea and China, but we don't have any class. We don't know. We don't read those ritual texts because the ritual texts are very complicated, and we have to reinvent rituals in a way that can be relevant to our modern lives, very few people, almost nobody, has attempted to remake rituals, right, in modern forms. I think this is a problem. I think we have to be able to engage this issue. Anyhow, we should take that dimension of our enterprise seriously. So that, I think, partially answers your first question. Friendship, in the Confucian tradition, friendship is not just about equality, equal relationship, of the kind Dewey was talking about, right, and advocating, the social equality, right? Friendship is also understood in familiar terms. We know we Chinese people, Korean people call brother, elder brother, elder brother, or jeje, or auntie. Still, even when you hire your foreign domestic helper, still we call her auntie, right? Our children call her auntie. We are familiarizing otherwise unfamiliar relation, strange relationship. So friendship is always, if you read Jushi's or any traditional Confucian correspondences with other Confucian friends, like Jushi's Zhangshi or Yu Jian, or Yu Xiangshan, or anybody, or they're all friends, but they are not of the same age, of course. There are some people are 10 years older than Jushi, some people are 13 years younger than Jushi. It's a friendship, long-lasting, lifelong friendship, but it's all kind of familiar kind of a relationship, right? They see themselves as a follower of the same Tao, and as a follower of the Tao, they become members of. That's why we call Jia, Liu Jia. Liu Jia is a family of Ru scholars, right? Because our scholarly relations become transformed into some sort of familiar relation. That's why we call Jia. So I think friendship is not purely, kind of the kind of a relationship that we find in the Greek friendship or Greco-Roman friendship, non-domination, maybe pure equality, right? You and I are equal men, and there's we are nobody's slave, nobody's your lower, whatever, you're nobody's master, and we are equal to each. I don't think Confucians have ever developed that kind of friendship, but friendship is always about mutual respect and understanding, and that kind of mutual respect, understanding, and mutual growth was cultivated through this familiarizing process. I think this is extreme, and ritual also made huge influence. When you're writing a letter, there is a way to address certain questions, and then you get into your own, main point, right? It's not like you just willy-nilly raise questions and criticize or whatever. There is a way to engage yourself with other people, even friends. So I think a ritual here is extremely important, because that way you can raise very critical, important questions, right? Even criticisms, so that the ones who read your letters are not offended or are not angry, right? So because this is a respectable intellectual or social engagement, and then the person is trying to rectify your wrong thing or trying to educate you with some important lessons, so that we have a productive conversation. So I think ritual still is important in friendship. But again, you are one of those scholars who are trying to revisit these values, right? And then the emotions and this relationship, this kind of relational virtue, value. I think this is very important. And again, as modern contemporary philosophers, we have a long way to go. And I think we should encourage ourselves to think deeply about these questions. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we were doing well with the time. 4 minutes past. What we're given. So Paul, are we supposed to just wrap up here now?
Yeah, I think we can wrap it up.
Okay. Yeah, so thank you again to Professor Kim, to Professor Amine, to Tampio, and Professor Liu. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah, and I don't know if Professor Kim, are you in Hong Kong now?
I'm at home in Hong Kong. Anyhow, Paul, thank you so much for the platform itself. You launched very important platform that help us to be connected with each other. And I think you're doing tremendous service for the whole field of Chinese comparative philosophy. Thank you so much for your leadership. And I'm also very grateful to Winnie. We've known each other for years, but I really appreciate your willingness to serve. You accepted this invitation to serve as a moderator today. So I appreciate your kindness and generosity. And of course, Loubna and Nick and Qing, all my friends and respected scholars, always, sometimes we criticize each other, sometimes we have a nice conversation, but always it's fun to engage with you guys, learn from you, and hopefully we can continue our intellectual debate in the future. And maybe next time, I hope I can discuss your book or your writings. Okay, thank you so much, friends, and all the audience who attended this workshop. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you for
everybody.
inviting
This
Thank
was
you, everyone. Yeah.
great. Thank you so much.
Okay.